We always love this matchup, right? It's good against good, the two best programs in the sport going at it on the field in the regular season. We don't see it very often. We usually see it in the postseason, whether it's the SEC title or even a national championship. This is a game that you just absolutely have to love. Hello and welcome to a Thursday edition of Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. We appreciate you being here. Today is Thursday, September 26th, and we hope that you're enjoying the show, whatever you're getting it, whether it's on the podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Our reviews have been sabotaged, so if you haven't reviewed yet, go and check out Apple Podcasts, go and check out Spotify. If you haven't rated the show, go ahead and rate it if you could. It's fine. It'd be awesome if you did, because we've had a lot of people that don't even listen to the show that gave it 1 star because their team was left out of the playoffs. Not our fault. I'm Greg McElroy. Mark's here. Jake's here. Jack's here. And we have an awesome slate of games to break down this weekend. I could not be more excited for this weekend. There have been a lot of conversation in the last couple of days about NIL fulfillments and whether or not guys have done this and guys have done that, and they lied to him and he lied to them and their agent lied to them. It's like, I don't care. Take me to the games. So I'm very, very much looking forward to breaking down the games, because the games matter. The games this weekend matter more than most, especially when you look at some of the games on the schedule. You got playoff contenders that are kicking off their conference schedule. You have Heisman hopefuls that are going to be on big platforms. A lot of answers will be received based on the outcomes this weekend. So let's dive in. Let's kick it off on a Friday night in the ACC down in Coral Gables between Virginia Tech and Miami. Virginia Tech and Miami, about a 3-touchdown thereabouts. I mean, maybe a little under that, depending on where you have it. It's a lot of points, I might add. So when we see a game that is technically supposed to be this one-sided, we're going to look at it not from the way that we usually look at it. We usually ask questions. We ask questions. All right, will they be able to do this? Will they be able to do that? Well, in a game that's supposed to be this one-sided, let's go through the musts that need to be happening for Virginia Tech for them to have a chance to win the game, okay? Number one, Virginia Tech cannot allow explosive plays. Miami has been outrageously explosive this year. They have 37 plays that have gone for at least 20 yards this season. That's through 4 games. They are more than halfway through their 20-yard plus gains since last year. So 37 plays here through 4 games. Last year, they gained 68 plays that went for 20 plus. So I think Shannon Dawson's looking at the overall talent, the personnel that they have all over the offense, and what they have at quarterback with Cam Ward that's allowed this group really to take off. Miami actually currently leads the country in yards per play against FBS opponents. They're averaging 9 yards per play, 9.2 to be exact. So Virginia Tech cannot allow explosive plays because this Miami group has been outrageous in that category this year. Number 2, Virginia Tech has to get off the field on 3rd down. Right now, opponents are converting just under 35% of their 3rd down opportunities against the Hokies. That's 46th in the country. Miami has had a ton of productivity on 3rd down this year. They're converting 64%. That is number 1 in college football. You look at where they were last year, they were at 41%. So they are significantly improved on 3rd down, which was another point of emphasis for Shannon Dawson. Number 3, Virginia Tech must win in the red zone. They have to hold Miami to field goals, and they cannot allow touchdowns. This was a massive point of emphasis for Miami this offseason, was red zone efficiency. Too often last year, they'd get down there and they can drive the ball between the 20s, but they couldn't score enough touchdowns. So far, they've been pretty good. Last year, they were 57.6% touchdowns scored. This year, they're 2 out of 3, so at 66, 67%. So they're better, but they're certainly not perfect in this part of the field just yet. They have leaned on the run game, and I do think that's an area where they can continue to grow and improve. And right now, Virginia Tech has been pretty decent in the red zone. They've allowed a decent amount of red zone penetrations, 19 red zone drives, but their red zone efficiency numbers, they're allowing 52.6% red zone efficiency. That's 59th, so middle of the pack there in college football. So they got to win in the red zone. And then finally, Virginia Tech better be ready to block them. Right? You better be capable of holding it down when their quarterbacks are dropping back to pass. Because right now, Virginia Tech is allowing pressure on 39% of their opponents, or 39% of their quarterbacks dropbacks. That is 115th in the FBS. And Miami conveniently leads the FBS with 16 sacks. Also of note, Miami, they have not been at 100% this year. Left tackle Jalen Rivers and defensive end Ruben Bain have been out of action the last couple weeks. Rivers played the entire Florida game, but had that undisclosed injury that had him out the last 3 games because of supposedly precautionary measures. And Bain got hurt really early against Florida and hasn't played very much at all. So in Bain's absence, guess who stepped up? Tyler Barron stepped up. He's been outrageous. 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 12 pressures through 4 games. Simeon Barrow, the transfer from Michigan State's been amazing. Elijah Alston, Akeem Mesidor have been awesome as well. So other guys have stepped up. But to be without your best player and still be one of the most disruptive groups in the country is pretty dang impressive. A couple trends in the game. Virginia Tech is 6-2 against the spread in conference play since the start of last season. That's the second best among Power 4 teams and the best in the ACC. Only Oregon, by the way, 7-2 against the spread is better. And then Miami is one of 8 Power 4 teams undefeated against the spread this season. They also have 7 games that have gone over the total. That's the longest active streak in the FBS. I'm taking Miami. I think they'll continue to roll. Absolutely love this team. Love what I've seen from Miami. The biggest game of the weekend will be on ABC, 7:30 Eastern time. The second-ranked Georgia Bulldogs travel to Tuscaloosa. We always love this matchup, right? It's good against good. The 2 best programs in the sport going at it on the field in the regular season. We don't see it very often. We usually see it in the postseason, whether it's the SEC title or even a national championship. This is a game that you just absolutely have to love. I mean, one team's won 6 titles since 2009. Another team's won 2, but also got there in 2017. So it doesn't get any better than this. It's the best matchup in the sport. It's the most pros on the field, and it is going to be an incredible environment there in Tuscaloosa. Now, Georgia, they've lost 8 of their last 9 against Alabama. Kirby Smart's 1-5 against the Crimson Tide as the head coach, but they've only lost 2 games since the start of 21 season. Okay, 2 games lost, 2 national championships. I'd say that's pretty dang good. Now, we all know that Kirby is largely considered the best coach in the sport. This is his 9th year. He's 97-16. He's won 5 consecutive AP top 5 matchups as a head coach. This is one shy of the longest win streak in AP top 5 matchups by a head coach all time. Guess who was the guy? And this will be very exciting for many here. Lou Holtz currently holds the longest streak of wins against AP top 5 teams. That was at Notre Dame from 1988 to 1990. Nick Saban won 6 in a row from 17 to 18. So it's happened before. Kirby in victory will match the longest streak ever between top 5s. But that leads us to the first question here. Question number 1. How good is Kalen DeBoer? How good is he? Now, we've only seen him have 3 seasons in the Power 5. So it's not like we've seen this long, resume with track record and precedent. Like we a lot of us just don't know. Like, I think he's amazing. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he's amazing, but it's not like there's this long history of success in games like this. Now, in 2019, he was at Indiana, spent 2 seasons as Washington's head coach. Every year of his life outside of those 3 have been at relatively lower levels of football, including a couple years as the head coach of Fresno State. But he's compiled 107-12 win-loss record. He's won at least 10 games in 8 of his 9 seasons as a college head coach. At Washington, he was 25-3, and against AP-ranked opponents, he is 12-2. Those 12 wins were actually consecutive. Okay, so he won 12 straight games against AP opponents, but it is bookended by losses. He lost by 7 to a ranked Oregon team back in 2021, and he lost in the national championship game last year to the Michigan Wolverines. So we've seen him do more with less forever, but this is by far his biggest matchup with a team that is comparable in talent to the team that he's playing against. So he might have brought a knife to a gunfight last year against Michigan. This year, he is fully equipped to go toe-to-toe with what some believe is the best coach in college football. Question number 2. Can Georgia get Carson Beck back on track against a young secondary? It's not often when I've watched Carson Beck, just in the year and change that he's played, the 17 starts that he has. It's not often when I've watched him and I think, man, he left a bunch of plays on the field. Well, against both Kentucky and against Clemson, there were some big missed opportunities. And against Kentucky in particular, it kind of was like he was seeing ghost a little bit. Now, for those of you that are Georgia fans, and if you're Bama fans or if you're just fans of the sport, like go back and watch that game. You can watch, YouTube on and check it out. Just go back and watch the Kentucky game. There were receivers open quite a few times, by the way. He had Oscar Delp, decided to check it down to ETN. He had an in-breaking route that would have been a big play, decided to check it down or take off to his left-hand side. I think he was seeing some ghosts because Kentucky did a really good job of mixing up their coverages and playing some things that are a little bit unorthodox. So as a result, in the games against both Kentucky and Clemson, his average depth of target was 6.26. It's just not very far downfield. And I happen to believe that big plays are going to determine this game. So he's going to have to push it downfield more so than he did against the 2 Power 5 teams he's played so far. 9 of Alabama's 12 players in the secondary are either first-year players or transfers. Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, has implemented a new system which relies a little bit more on zone coverage, a little bit more on disguise, and a little bit more on trying to fool the opposing quarterback and bait the opposing quarterback to throw into traffic. So can Carson Beck bounce back and get back on track against a relatively inexperienced secondary? That is question number 2. Question number 3. Can Alabama generate some pressure without blitzing? Carson Beck against Kentucky got hit on about a quarter of his plays. So he got hit and he got hit hard. And I think those hits did have an impact on how he saw the field, and it had an impact on his command. Well, fast forward in the game just a little bit. Georgia's offensive line, Tate Ratledge, gets hurt in the game. And if you really look at Georgia's O-line, they have not been quite as stable as they've been in the past. They've had some whiffs. They're allowing pressure on just 18% of the dropbacks, which is the 4th best in the sport. So it's not like they're giving up tons of pressure, but when they have given up pressure, it's happened quickly. They have actually the 2nd worst time to first pressure at 2.34 seconds. The only one with a quicker first pressure is Kent State. And if you care about it, look at Kent State's schedule. It would make sense why their time is slower than Georgia's and pretty much anybody's else's. So Georgia's had some inconsistencies up front, and teams have been able to overload their protections a little bit this year with some pressures and some disguised pressures. Do you realize that Alabama has brought 5 or more pass rushers this year just 4 times? That's the fewest in the sport. The second fewest is Wake Forest with 9 blitzes this year. Alabama's blitz rate is 3.3%, and that's the lowest in the FBS by nearly 5 percentage points. So Alabama this year, and albeit early in the season, they have not been a team that's willing to, or not been a team that's needed to, ramp up the pressure by bringing extra defenders. Maybe that changes this year to kind of speed up the process for Carson Beck, because Carson Beck did not see the field very well the last time he was out there. Question number 4. Can Alabama continue to create big plays? Alabama averages about 11 explosive plays a game. 11% of their snaps offensively go for 20-plus yards. That's the 7th best rate in the sport. We know what Jalen Milroe wants to do. He wants to soften things up with the run game. He's been excellent in the run game this year, and I love how much this offensive staff is leaning in to allowing him to use that athleticism and the danger that comes every time you snap the ball and he's carrying it on the perimeter. So we know that he's also a guy too that wants to push it downfield. 29% of his throws travel 20 plus yards. That's the second highest rate in the sport. So nobody throws it downfield with more regularity than Jalen Milroe. Nearly 1/3 of his throws travel way downfield. Now, Georgia's defense has allowed just 10 explosives this year. And by the way, in case you're new to the show, we define explosives as 10 plus yard runs and 20 plus yard passes. And Georgia's allowed just 10 this year. That's the second fewest in the sport. They gave up 5 against Kentucky. And if you look at it, there was like 12-yard run, 13-yard run, 17-yard run. It's not like they gave up 60-yard runs. They gave up 4 against Tennessee Tech, and they gave up 1 against Clemson. So it's rare to create big plays against this defense. And Georgia's now gone 16 straight quarters without allowing a touchdown. That's the third longest streak in the FBS in the past 20 seasons. Question number 5. Which team will force a key turnover? Now, Georgia has yet to turn the ball over this season. There's only a couple teams that can say that. Indiana and Louisville and Georgia. So 3 teams that have yet to turn the ball over. They forced 3, including a ridiculous interception by Malachi Starks in the opening week game against Clemson. Alabama's turned it over 4 times this year, including 3 times against USF. Some self-inflicted, some definitely created by the opposition. But they've also forced 4 turnovers. And you know what they've done on those forced turnovers? They've scored 28 points. So it doesn't get much better than that. 4 turnovers forced, 28 points scored off turnovers. That could be huge. We all remember, too, last year. Think back to the SEC championship turnover. Georgia had a turnover deep in their own end, and that ultimately might have been the difference. So a key mistake in this game might flip it on its head. So question 5, which team will force a key turnover? And then final question here. And I always wonder this in a game like this. How significant is home field advantage? Because I've looked at some of the biggest games this year, and whether it's Miami at Florida, Tennessee at Oklahoma, Texas at Michigan, we think back to some of the biggest games this year, and it hasn't been a huge issue for the road team. Just hasn't. Notre Dame at A&M. I mean, some of the biggest games, some of the most hostile environments, the road teams come out the victor. Well, that hasn't been the case in Tuscaloosa for a really long time. Since 2008, Alabama is 106-6 at home. 3 of those 6 losses came against Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel, and Joe Burrow. And Alabama's won 17 straight at home in conference play. Yes, they lost to Texas last year, but Texas was not in the SEC at that point. So there is a bit of a caveat to that 17-game win streak in the SEC. So that 17-game streak is tied with Georgia for the longest active streak in the FBS. So their last conference loss at home was against LSU in 2019. A couple trends in the game. Alabama is the first time being a regular season underdog since 2015 when they were a dog at Georgia. By the way, they won that game 38-10. Before that, Alabama had not been a regular season underdog since 2008. That was at Georgia as well, where they were a 6.5-point dog. They won that game 41-30, and they've won 3 straight regular season games as an underdog. Alabama has been favored in 90 consecutive home games. The last time they were a dog was 2007 against LSU. They lost by 7 as a 7-point dog. And then Georgia is 10-4 against the spread against top 5 teams over the last 10 years. That's the best in the FBS. I'm taking Alabama. And what I expect to be a high-scoring game. Tail of the tape, I look at Alabama's quarterback, Georgia's quarterback. I think it's pretty dang close. I really do. I look at the running back position. Trevor Etienne, Frazier, what you're getting at the running back spot from Alabama with Jam Miller, Justice Haynes. I think it's pretty dang close. Wide receivers, probably lean just ever so slightly towards Georgia because I think they have a little more depth at the position. But what I've seen from Ryan Williams, he might be the best guy in the game. Offensive line, I lean towards Bama. Defensive line, I lean slightly towards Georgia, assuming they're fully healthy. Linebacker, I lean towards Bama. I think Bama has really good players on the interior. While I think Georgia's also excellent, it's a slight edge, just a slight edge towards Alabama. And then the back end, I lean slightly towards Georgia, but I don't know if we know just yet about the Georgia secondary. I lean Bama. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I expect both offenses to play well, and I think it's going to come down to the wire. Game number 3, number 15, Louisville at Notre Dame. This game will be mid-afternoon. Notre Dame and a decent favorite, about a touchdown. First question is this: how healthy is Louisville? Okay. For those that haven't been paying attention, it's understandable if you haven't. It's okay. Louisville has kind of been able to kind of go through the motions without getting a ton of coverage, but they're good. I'm just telling you, they are excellent. It's just, I don't know how many people know that. Well, they're going to find out this week when they play against the Notre Dame team that I got a ton of respect for, but they've been banged up. They lost Jaden Thompson. They lost Saunders, who's going to miss the rest of the year. Those guys are both out after getting hurt against Georgia Tech last week. Quincy Riley, who's an All-American corner, questionable at the moment for the game against Notre Dame. Missed most of the second half on Saturday against Georgia Tech. And Brom right now is calling him a game-time decision. Maurice Turner, running back, is out several weeks with an ankle injury. South Alabama transfer Colin Lacey, he broke his collarbone during fall camp. He was back at practice last week, which is actually pretty quick. Pretty quick for him to be back out there. And Brom said he's likely a game-time decision as well, and that Lacey is improving, but we weren't sure whether or not he was going to be able to go against the Irish. So how healthy is Louisville? I mean, they've had a bunch of guys that have experienced some injuries already this year. Question number 2. How much better is the passing attack for Louisville with Tyler Shough? Now, Tyler Shough was the guy that Jeff Brom and his brother Brian Brom, they went and they looked at the portal, they scouted everybody, and they went after Tyler Shough. They clearly liked what they saw. They clearly feel like he's got a really high ceiling, and I agree. I remember watching Tyler Shough on the field, I think it was like 2019, and being really impressed watching him throw alongside Justin Herbert when he was the backup at Oregon. This is a guy with a lot of talent. Problem is, he has been a little bit banged up from time to time. He can make throws that Jack Plummer couldn't make last year, but he's missed some time. So he's been at Oregon, he's been at Texas Tech, and when he's been out there and not injured, he is excellent. All right, really solid. This is a guy who completed 31 of 50 passes for 436 yards and 2 touchdowns against just 1 interception against Oklahoma back in COVID year of 2020. Threw for 350 plus at UCLA. Like, he can do it against quality teams. It's just, can he do it this week against what I think is an elite secondary? He's got some good targets too. We talked already about Colin Lacey not being available, but Ja'Cory Brooks, the Alabama transfer, has been rock solid. Was a top 50 recruit. Has had some bright spots in an Alabama uniform, but now he's the go-to guy in the passing game, and he'll be going against a secondary that is as good as you'll find in the entire sport. Question number 3. Can Notre Dame win in the trenches against Louisville's defensive line? Last year, this was a major mismatch in favor of Louisville. I mean, big time. They sacked Sam Hartman 5 times. They had about 1.5 yards per carry when you factor in the sacks as well. They had 28 rushing attempts, so it's not like they abandoned the run. I mean, Audric Estime was a guy that ran for over 1,300 yards last year. He averaged almost 6.5 yards a carry. It was by far his worst game. He had 10 carries for 20 yards, and his longest run of the day was 6 yards. Definitely his worst performance. His second worst performance against Ohio State, but he had triple the amount of yards against the Buckeyes than he did against the Cardinals. So not sure if Louisville's better on defense than it was last year, but I do think they're deeper. And Ashton Gelati, they're going to move him around a little bit, all right? The Irish have struggled at times on the offensive line, and it's kind of been a week-to-week thing. Like, who's going to play well this week, guys? Let's evaluate. So they're going to take Ashton Gelati. He's not going to line up just at defensive end. He might slide inside, line up over the center. He might line up over the guard. He might line up at linebacker level. It might be in an outside stance, like way off the edge. Like, he's going to bounce around, and he's kind of difficult to account for. So you need to be really mindful of the 6'3", 270-pound terror that usually lives on the edge of the defense. But he was a huge reason why they won 10 games last year, and he's also a guy that can take over the game. Right now, the Cardinals are pretty good, man, allowing just 269 yards of total offense a game. Granted, you look at kind of what they've played, Austin Peay, Jack State, Georgia Tech, they haven't been able to get a whole lot going on the ground. Just 2.5 yards a carry so far. And we know Georgia Tech is a pretty good group when it comes to running the football. So with Gelati and a deep, talented defensive front, they're going to be tough to move off the spot. And then question number 4, will quarterback run continue to power Notre Dame's offense? All right, they're 3 wins this year. Riley Leonard against A&M, 12 for 63, Against Purdue, 11 for 100, and against Miami, Ohio, 12 for 143. That's 102 rushing yards a game on 11 and a half carries. All right, their one loss, that was against NIU. He had 11 carries for 16 yards. So if it's the best thing you do offensively, lean into it and complement those talented running backs. I think quarterback run will open some things off play action, and it should be beneficial for the Irish. Notre Dame is 10-2 against the spread against ranked teams since 2002. That's their best. That's the best mark in the FBS with a minimum of 5 games. And Louisville is 9-18 against the spread on the road since 2018. That's their third worst FBS over that span. I'm taking the Irish in this game. I think they protect the home field, and one of the few big matchups that they have this year. I think this has been a revenge game. I think it's been a circled game that they've talked about all offseason, and I think they get that revenge on Saturday against the Cardinals. Number 21, Oklahoma, will travel to Auburn, where they are just a slight favorite. New quarterback under center for the Sooners. That's question number 1. How will Michael Hawkins Jr. fare in his first start? Now, Jackson Arnold was benched in the second quarter last week's game against Tennessee. He basically just had a very difficult time not throwing into traffic. I don't know how else to say it. Difficult time not throwing into traffic. Didn't seem like he meshed real well with the RPO game. Didn't seem to have a great feel for what they were trying to be offensively when he was trying to run the ball. The inaccuracies on the downfield, he's hit 2 throws that travel more than 15 yards downfield out of 17 this year. That's not good enough. So they decided to make a change. In comes Michael Hawkins, who was kind of the talk of fall camp. Like you had kind of heard, hey, Jackson Arnold's been struggling a bit. I mean, he's still our guy, but he's been struggling a little bit. But this freshman, man, this Hawkins kid's a player. Now, he took over in the second quarter. It wasn't the greatest performance of all time, but consider the circumstances. It was going to be tough sledding. It was 11 for 18, 132, a touchdown. This is the first start of the true freshman's career. So this is obviously significant. And to go on the road and start a game in the SEC in your first start is not something you should take lightly, even though I was super optimistic with what I saw from Hawkins last week. So I do think he's the best man for the job. I just think this is going to be a really tough test. That's for sure, especially compartmentalizing the pressure that you're going to feel when you go on the road into a hostile setting. Question number 2, can Auburn stop turning the ball over? Pretty dang simple there, isn't it? 4 games into the season. And right now, you've had to play 2 quarterbacks. You've also benched 2 quarterbacks. Both quarterbacks rank in the top 3 in the SEC in interceptions thrown this season. That's not a very good situation. Hank Brown threw 3 in the first half last week against Arkansas. That's most by an Auburn quarterback in the first half since 2006. So I think Peyton Thorne's going to be back in the lineup. He also threw 3 in the second half against Cal. So it's not like he hasn't made mistakes himself. And as a team, they've thrown 8 interceptions, which is the second most in the FBS behind East Carolina. Now, Oklahoma is a team that's going to get their hands on the football. This is an elite defense at all 3 levels. I cannot tell you how impressed I am with Oklahoma's defense. Defensive line, linebacker, secondary. I love this group from top to bottom. I also love how opportunistic they are. All right, they forced 12 turnovers this year. That's tied for the most in the FBS with San Jose State. Auburn has had 14 turnovers this season, which is tied for the most in the FBS with East Carolina. Again, so these teams kind of look to figure out the turnover margin, but man, if Auburn continues down this path, it's very hard to envision them winning a lot of football games in the SEC. And question number 3, will Auburn just finally say, forget about it, we're going all in by running the football? All right, one area where Auburn has found some success this year is in the run game. Now, they don't run it probably as often as they need to. Granted, it's an RPO-based offense, but they're only running it right now about 43% of the time. That's 90th in the FBS. But they have been pretty successful when they've chosen to commit to it. They're averaging 6.2 yards per carry. That's 14th in the FBS and the best in the SEC. As a whole, they're doing a pretty good job in yards per play, but they haven't been able to really convert that into points. They're creating big touchdowns. They're creating big plays. Now it's about tying it all together. And this is a gotta-have-it situation for the Auburn Tigers. All right, loser leaves town type of situation. A couple trends here. Oklahoma would have their lowest total in the game since 2014 against Texas. If it stays where it's at, that total was at 46.5, and it went way over. 31-26 was the final in that game. So back in 2014, a long time ago. Oklahoma is 4-9-1 against the spread on the road since 2021. That's the worst among Power 4 teams. All right, you ready to panic? All right, lose this game and see what happens. Okay, this game above all others this weekend might have the most significant fallout. Oklahoma falling to 0-2 in the SEC. Their first 2 games in the SEC, to lose both of them, that's going to be a tough pill for Brent Venables to swallow. And then on the other side, Auburn in defeat is sitting there at 2-3 with 3 home losses. By the way, never thought in a million years with that start to the schedule, we'd be looking at a 2-3 Auburn team with 3 games lost at Jordan-Hare. Now you look at what's coming. You have 3 straight SEC road trips at Georgia, at Missouri, and at Kentucky. So if Auburn doesn't get this one, it's a real threat to fast forward to November and be sitting there at 2-6. I'll take Auburn in the game. I think desperation is on their side. I think Peyton Thorne is going to be able to play within himself, and I think they're going to be patient offensively. And to be honest with you, it's a matter of who do I trust more? Do I trust Auburn's offense more than I trust the true freshman on the road in the SEC with an offensive line that has not played well? I trust Auburn a little bit more. My goodness, it is tough to get fired up about making that pick, but I'll take the Tigers in a gotta-have-it situation. A couple other great games we're very much looking forward to. Oklahoma State and Kansas State. How about this 2-game stretch for Oklahoma State? All right, really tough. Get back on track situation for both teams. Kansas State had a very un-Kansas State-like performance last week, right? Those of you that were watching deep into the night, it's like, my goodness, man, I do not recognize what I'm watching for the team wearing purple. Like Chris Kleiman, forever, discipline, toughness, no mistakes, don't beat themselves. Well, they had 3 turnovers in 7 minutes of game time, completely derailed any momentum whatsoever against BYU. Those turnovers resulted in 3 touchdowns in a span of about, no time whatsoever. Okay, 38-9, they fall at the hands of BYU. And then Oklahoma State on the other side, they've been a team that's been pretty good, turning people over. They're forcing almost 2 a game, which is the reason why they've been able to pull off some of their closer games. So K-State's going to need to take care of the football at home and keep it clean, because if they don't protect the ball, it's going to be tough to win. The other thing I'm curious about, can Oklahoma State's defense play a little bit better? Now, the team, I know they played pretty well last week against a backup quarterback, and they gave him 22 points. It's pretty good, right? You got to feel pretty good about giving up 22 points. But the team that Oklahoma State will face, they're just not playing very good right now. Let's just be honest. Like, if you look at where things are for Kansas State and you look at where things are for Oklahoma State, I mean, we're talking about a group that's 115th in explosive rush and pass defense, 92nd in yards per carry allowed. So Oklahoma State's going to have to play better, because Kansas State's looking at that tape saying, we're going to run the ball. We have a 3-headed monster between our quarterback and multiple backs. We're going to run the football. Another very important aspect of this, too, is that Alan Bowman, he bounced back. First half, not so great, 8 for 22. But he got benched and then started to play a little bit better as the game went along. He finished said performance 8 of 11 and threw for about 120 yards there in the second half and a couple touchdowns. Obviously, the interceptions are a huge problem, but I would expect Alan Bowman to play much better. But they got to take some pressure off of him. I mean, the Doak Walker Award winner right now, Ollie Gordon, is held to like 60 yards a game, thereabouts, 50 yards a game. So they got to take some of the pressure off the passing game, but I don't think they'll do it this week. I like Kansas State to protect the home field and bounce back in a big, big-time performance in the Big 12 this weekend. Arkansas at Texas A&M. Excuse me, not at Texas A&M. Arkansas against Texas A&M. This game's in Arlington. This will be a really interesting matchup, to be honest with you. This one really intrigues me because I'm not sure yet what to expect from A&M defensively. All right, so that's one of the questions I'm curious about. How will Texas A&M contain Taylon Green? Now he's 6'6", 230, really smooth for a guy that's big and agile and talented. Now the passing, maybe not going to be a guy that carves you up through the air all the time, but it's in there. Like he can make the throws, it just doesn't always do it. Now, how did Texas A&M lose to Notre Dame to start the year? They gave up nearly 200 yards on the ground. Okay, that was the most that they've allowed in the first 4 games, and 6 yards per carry thereabouts. All right, Riley Leonard didn't go off, but he averaged, 5+ yards per carry. Well, I think Kalen Green is a bigger, faster, more physically gifted Riley Leonard. So that's something to be very aware of. A&M's going to have to be really smart defensively and not try to do too much, because they try to do too much occasionally in the first couple games, and it resulted in big runs by the opposition. Can Arkansas's defensive line get after Texas A&M's quarterback situation? That's what I'm calling it. The A&M offensive line done a pretty good job. They've allowed just 8 tackles for loss this year. That's the fewest in the country. They've been solid in pass protection, which has been pretty dang good. And then you look at some of the run game. I mean, they're able to kind of get some things going on the run game as well. Now, what are they going to do at quarterback? Marshall Reed's helped kind of stabilize the Aggies offense. And we know that Connor Wigman's had some injury issues in the past, but they're not great throwing the football. They are a little bit one-dimensional. They're 116th nationally in passing yardage. So that's not what you need. The good news is they're running it for nearly 260 a game. So that is encouraging. That has them in the top 10. So a little one-dimensional. I lean Arkansas in this game. I look at A&M, tons of talent, tons of potential. But I think Arkansas, actually, with how they defend the run and how they run the football, plus a little bit more balance and a little bit more explosiveness and a veteran quarterback in Kalen Green, I think Arkansas goes and gets this one at Jerry World there on Saturday. Number 19, Illinois against Penn State. Big number here, by the way. Penn State, a healthy favorite. This game will be Saturday night. Second straight road game against a ranked conference foe for Illinois. They beat Nebraska last Friday. And if you look at where they're coming into the game in passing and rushing production, they're 73rd and 75th respectively. Okay. But they are playing good defense for the most part. They're 15th in scoring defense. So I kind of like this Illinois offense. Like numbers wise, maybe not going to blow you away, but I kind of like them. It kind of starts with Luke Altmaier, been a good decision maker. He's got, I think, plenty of arm to be able to throw it to every corner of the field if you need to. And he's been pretty accurate. So I think he gives his guys a chance. They have a big physical running back that's difficult to bring down. And then on the other side, if you look at Penn State, how will they be running the football against this front? Nicholas Singleton and Katrin Allen, they're the 10th best rushing offense in the country right now. They're averaging 255 yards on the ground per game. But who have they played that's capable of really stopping the run? You say West Virginia, and I don't know yet. I'm not sure yet. So still a lot to learn about Andy Kotelnicki's system, and this should be a heck of a test for Penn State, by far their biggest test of the season up to this point. A couple more good games to keep an eye on. All right, Washington at Rutgers. This will be Friday night. Rutgers looking to start 4-0 for the first time since 2012. Can Rutgers get things going offensively now? Scarlet Knights offense is definitely improved. Ethan Kaliakmanis stepping into that lineup. They've been pretty good, but they haven't really been tested yet. Yes, Virginia Tech's defense, pretty solid, but this is a different level when playing against Washington. This Washington defense, led by Steve Belichick, the defensive coordinator, they're 11th in the country right now in total defense and near the top of the Big Ten in nearly every defensive category. So it's not going to be easy for Rutgers to run the ball, but you look at their running back, Kyle Mongai. I love him. He's amazing. Brown can wear you down as well. Then Kaliakmanis will hit a couple throws, and I would not be surprised at all if Rutgers gets to 4-0. Kentucky and Ole Miss. This game's noon Eastern time on ABC. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath. Look forward to watching this one for sure. Ole Miss has been off to a torrid pace so far offensively. How about 220 points scored through the first 4 games? They lead the FBS in scoring, 55 points per game, and they lead them in total offense, 671 yards per game, and they're tied with Texas for the FBS lead in scoring defense, allowing just 5.5 points per game. So what gives here? The Rebels have been really strong against the run, too, allowing just 34.5 rushing yards per game, 1.1 yards per carry, and 40% of their opponents' rushes have resulted in 0 or negative yards, the second best rate in the FBS behind Stanford. So it's going to be a fascinating matchup. Kentucky played great a couple weeks ago in matching the physicality against Georgia. Now they'll have to do so against a team that really leans heavily into tempo offense. So maybe not quite as much just blunt force trauma, maybe a little bit more speed and stamina. Can Kentucky keep up? It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to be there on Saturday morning. Maryland at Indiana. Indiana is a favorite, trying to become 5-0 for the first time since 1967. I guess when Curt Cignetti got the job and he said, hey, I win, Google me, I guess he's right. Indiana's quarterback, Curtis Rourke, named Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week after beating UCLA, put together a ridiculously strong outing against Charlotte. He is really hot right now. Really, really hot. All right, 16-20, 258, 1 touchdown, no picks. Indiana's run game's dominated. They're rushing for over 200 yards against last week at 6 touchdowns on 41 attempts. On the other side, Maryland, Billy Edwards has been pretty solid. 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. Run the ball, has showcased some athleticism. This was a much debated quarterback conversation. Like, would it be him? Would it be MJ Morris? Would it be whoever it's going to be? But Billy Edwards ends up getting it, and he's been pretty good so far. They have 3 running backs that are all solid, and they have, I think, one of the best receivers in the sport in Ty Felton, who has 41 receptions for 604 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's a pretty good start to the season for Felton and this passing attack. How can you not take Indiana right now? They are hot. They're playing great. They're as confident as ever, and they're at home. So they're going to have a lot of things on their side when taking on the Terps. Wisconsin is at USC. USC is a healthy favorite here. Wisconsin's 1-6 all-time against the Trojans, and Wisconsin enters Saturday really needing a statement performance that this team's going to be able to bounce back. Now, they did not play well in each of their first 2 games. Those were both they were victorious in both those games, but it wasn't great performances. They lost convincingly to Alabama. They have a really difficult schedule. There's no doubt. Really tough schedule, but I want to see something from Braden Locke in this game. They had to take over in a difficult spot for Tyler Van Dyke. Van Dyke gets hurt on the first possession. Braden Locke goes in there, and it wasn't great. Now we need to see some improvement offensively. And look, SC slid down to 13th in the AP poll. They lost close on the road at Michigan. They almost had it. They make a tackle there in the fourth quarter. Maybe it's a different outcome. But you look at where they're at, man. I think this SC team is so much better than they were a year ago. I think they win this game going away. I'm just not sold right now on what I've seen from Wisconsin. Colorado is at UCF. UCF is a healthy favorite here, and they're trying to start 4-0 for the first time since 2018. Now, this is a great setup for UCF. They're well rested. They've had a strong start to the season. They've scored more than 35 points in every game they've played. Colorado's defense has struggled at times, especially against the run. They're 100th right now in explosive rush defense, which is going to be a big part of this game. RJ Harvey, Penny Boone, those are the 2 running backs. And then Arkansas transfer KJ Jefferson. He's the quarterback, but he's also really capable with the ball in his hands. But man, to me, it's all about RJ Harvey. Like, one of the most explosive runners in the country, averaging 8 yards per carry, has 8 touchdowns through 3 games. Now he's had a bye week, and they have some momentum going into the bye week. And then UCF's defense. Yeah, they've been carved up in the air. They've been carved up a lot. I mean, Josh Hoover at TCU threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns a couple weeks ago. But that's the one difference, is that TCU was able to adequately protect Josh Hoover. And I don't know if Colorado's O-line will be able to adequately protect Shedeur Sanders. So I'm taking UCF in the game. I think they win the game going away. This is a statement opportunity for UCF and Gus Malzahn with Big Noon coming to town. A lot of buzz around this team, a lot of buzz around this game. And I think they do like Oregon did last year, and they win going away. Wouldn't be surprised to see them maybe throw a couple more in the end zone there, even if the game's getting a little sideways there in the second half. Number 3, Ohio State, goes on the road for their first test of the year against Michigan State. This will be a really interesting game. Michigan State has not defeated Ohio State at home since 1999. Yes, they did beat them in Columbus back in 2015, but it's been a while since they've won in East Lansing. Michigan State's played pretty well this year. Turnovers have been a huge problem. They want to keep this game close. They better not turn it over. Aiden Childs got to protect the ball. Simple as that. He's got 8 picks this year. All right, I do think Michigan State's defense will hang in there. I think their offense might be able to move the ball a little bit against Ohio State. Man, I don't know how they're going to be able to slow them down. I mean, this Ohio State offense is super elite. I'm not sure how you keep them under 40. The interesting side note of this game, Ryan Day's first game as the head coach, yes, it was in an interim capacity or in a placeholder capacity, was actually against Jonathan Smith and Oregon State back in 2018. And on that day, Oregon State ran for nearly 200 yards, including a couple big hitters by Artavis Pierce. So I think Ohio State handles their business and goes on the road to Michigan State. I just don't know if Michigan State has enough on either side of the ball to keep this thing close. I like the Buckeyes big in East Lansing. Florida State is at SMU. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time on ACC Network. This is SMU's first ACC conference game. Florida State got a victory, needed it, maybe a little momentum heading into their first road game of the year. But I don't know what to make of last week's game and how it carries over into this week's game. So it's hard for me to envision a scenario where Florida State wins this game if they can't get something going offensively. Because SMU, they scored less than 20 against BYU, but Florida State hasn't gone beyond the 20-point mark since week 0 against Georgia Tech. So the defense can only hold up so long before that defense will finally give way. So Florida State, will they be able to keep SMU in check? Look, SMU's running the football like crazy, averaging 5.5 yards a carry, ran for 240 on the ground and 3 touchdowns. So there's reason to believe that they've kind of found their offensive identity. Can Florida State slow it down or keep up? That'll be a fascinating one. I like the Mustangs to take care of business in that one. And then finally, the nightcap, Big 12 after dark, one of my favorites, right? Arizona against Utah. Utah fresh off a really impressive performance, having to take on their former Pac-12 foe here in a conference game. Noah Fafita, Tetairoa McMillan, 2 of the best players in the sport. Like, we know that those 2 guys are incredible. All right, absolutely incredible. Beyond them, what all does Arizona have? They haven't been great on third down. Fafita's had a few interceptions, not a ton, but a few. And they can't afford to give the ball away against a Utah team that is going to do a great job of applying pressure. Now, Oklahoma State, they struggled. Struggled throwing the ball last week for the most part, to the point where their 7th-year senior was benched. So we'll see whether or not Noah Fafita can find the answers to an elite defensive group at all 3 levels. Arizona's defense, look, they seem to be kind of the missing link here a little bit. Not sure that they're anywhere near as good as they were a year ago. 72nd total defense. They're allowing 27 points a game. Utah's allowing 13, just so you understand. That's a pretty significant gap right there. So maybe Arizona can generate some plays on special teams, maybe win the hidden yardage. But, man, I don't know how you go into Utah and get a win, not with how they're playing defense. Regardless of who starts a quarterback, I think Utah just has too much, and we're overwhelmed. Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan en route to another victory there in the Big 12. Hey, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. It's always awesome for us to be able to interact like this. I always give you the Giant Killers here on a fun edition of Always College Football. Your Giant Killers this week are Arkansas, who is a healthy favorite or a healthy underdog. Auburn, also a healthy underdog. And then finally, if we're going to dive deep in the weeds, right? Like, we need to dive deep in the weeds. Who are some teams that could potentially pull things off? I'll go Alabama. They're an underdog at home as well. How can Alabama be a giant killer when they are, in fact, a giant themselves? I don't know, but hey, use it as you will, all right? The Giant Killers are always fun, and we've been pretty good on the Giant Killers, I might add. We've been pretty good so far this year. So for all of us here at Always College Football, we encourage all of you to continue to like, rate. I cannot emphasize that enough. Rate the podcast if you like what you've heard today, if you like what we've done here over the course of this season. Our ratings have been sabotaged in the past, but you guys can help push back by giving us a good rating, and we appreciate those of you that have already done that. So please rate, please subscribe on the podcast, and then, of course, you can always check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, Always College Football. For all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.